Greetings, esteemed guests. For most of us, Willy Wonka is a symbol of childhood wonder. He is the eccentric candy man, the giver of golden tickets, and the resident of a world made of sugar. But if you peel back the bright purple wrapper of Roald Dahl's 1964 masterpiece, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, you don't find a caramel center. You find the unsettling bones of the British Empire. Throughout the story, we are given glimpses of a much darker reality just beneath the surface. A special kind of cruelty is perpetuated behind his factory walls, and we are going to be knocking those walls down today. We're looking at how Roald Dahl's classic story serves as a direct representation of the Atlantic slave trade and British colonial narratives. First, Willy Wonka's primary victims. To understand the Oompa Loompas, we have to look at where they were before the orange skin and green hair of the movies. In the original text, the Oompa Loompas weren't magical creatures from a fictional land. They were a tribe of African pygmies. In the 1964 first edition, Wonka describes finding the Oompa Loompas in the very deepest and darkest part of the African jungle, where no white man had ever been before. This isn't just a whimsical detail. Wonka admits to smuggling them into England in large packing cases with holes in them. For history fanatics, literary critics, and English professors, this imagery is a chilling parallel to the Middle Passage, where enslaved Africans were packed into the holds of ships and ferried as cargo. Forced into lives of extreme brutality and exploitation, Wonka's factory is a closed ecosystem. The Oompa Loompas live there, work there, and never leave. They are essentially his private workforce. But the most telling colonial element is how they are paid. Wonka doesn't pay them in money. He pays them in cacao beans or cocoa beans. This is not only reminiscent of slavery, but also another dark part of history. The mining towns with company scrip, rather than real wages, used during the Industrial Revolution, and also strong ties to the modern faces of exploitation, that being the chocolate companies not following fair trade protocols. They perpetuate slavery and indentured servitude, entrapping individuals in situations they are powerless to escape from. More specifically, this mirrors the truck system or company store model used in colonial plantations, called debt patronage. By paying workers in the very goods they manufacture or farm, or providing goods only the company can access or import, a malicious employer ensures the workers can never achieve financial independence or aspire to a better life. Wonka tells Charlie they'd do anything for a cocoa bean. This simplifies a complex human tribe into a group driven purely by primitive desires, a common trope in colonial literature used to justify the management of indigenous people. A common trope in colonial literature used to justify the management of indigenous peoples. To explain taking the Oompa Loompas from their home, Dahl employs the white savior narrative for Wonka's justification. Wonka describes Africa as a terrible country filled with snozwangers and wangdoodles that were practically eating the Oompa Loompas for breakfast. This can be compared to the large predators of Africa that occasionally kill humans. This is an important note, In Western society, similar incidents also occur, such as cougars, bears, and Florida's alligators, and even the typically non-predatory moose of Canada. That being said, Wonka's story is almost a beat-for-beat reproduction of the 19th century British colonial rhetoric. The colonizers and so-called missionaries or ambassadors argued that colonization was a moral necessity because it rescued native populations from their own savage environments and brought them the safety of Western industry. It is also important to note these excursions and journeys embarked on by so-called Western explorers often required the help from locals to even be possible. And despite the best efforts of experienced locals, these missions often still resulted in death. In the story, the characters treat the Oompa Loompas as commodities. When Veruca Salt or Veronica Salt, I don't know which, screams, "I want an Oompa Loompa right now," she isn't asking for a coworker. She is asking for a pet or a slave. Her father doesn't correct her on her ethics of owning a person. He simply discusses the logistics of the purchase.
Writing. And so, in the greatest of secrecy, I transported the entire population of Oompa Loompas to my factory here.
Hey, Daddy, I want an Oompa Loompa. I want you to get me an Oompa Loompa right away.
All right, Veruca, all right. I'll get you one before the day's out.
I want an Oompa Loompa now.
This can be compared to the auctioning of slaves and the treatment of humans as property or livestock. The way he calmly attempts to navigate the situation as a business transaction is indicative of the environment and practices being propagated. By the late 1960s, the civil rights movement in the US and decolonization movements globally changed the way readers saw Wonka. The NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, issued a statement expressing concern that Oompa Loompas were a representation of the slave trade. This created a rather pressing problem for the 1971 film Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Eventually, director Mel Stewart realized that showing African pygmies working in a factory for a white master would be a disaster for the film's public perception. His solution was to camouflage them. The movie turned them orange with green hair and changed their origin to the fictional Loompa Land. They became monsters or fairy tale creatures rather than humans. Roald Dahl eventually followed suit, rewriting the book in 1973 to describe them as having rosy white skin and golden brown hair. But critics argued that changing their appearance didn't change the story setting or its structure. The Oompa Loompas were still an imported labor force that lived in the factory and served their master. However, the power dynamic remained colonial, even with changes in their appearance. The most tragic part of this representation is its proximity to the truth. When Dahl was writing, the British chocolate industry was built on the back of labor in West Africa. In the early 20th century, companies like Cadbury, which Dahl was inspired by, when writing, faced massive public backlash when it was revealed their chocolate was being produced by slave labor on the islands of Sao Tome and Principe. Even today, the Wonka fantasy masks a dark reality. Reports from the US Department of Labor and non-governmental organizations like the International Rights Advocates show that over 1.5 million children are still engaged in hazardous labor in the cacao sectors of Ivory Coast and Ghana. This is according to the US Department of Labor as of 2020. The Oompa Loompas weren't just a mistake of Dahl's imagination. They were an accurate and thinly veiled depiction of the global economic system that allows Western society to enjoy cheap chocolate at the cost of imported labor, the modern slave trade. Willy Wonka is a character about secrets. His factory is a place of locked doors and hidden rooms. But the biggest secret wasn't the recipe for the everlasting gobstopper. It was the fact that one of our favorite childhood stories was built on the imagery of the Atlantic slave trade. By looking at the Oompa Loompas as they were originally written, we don't just learn about Roald Dahl's perspective. We learn how easily we can swallow the story of exploitation if it's coated with enough sugar. Thank you so much for watching this video until the end. If you liked it, you may enjoy my video about the true monster that's in Nosferatu. Bye bye!